experience. But eventually I decided not to do that, and I think I'm just going to tell you guys a bunch of stories. And you guys can kind of draw your own interpretations. Or maybe we'll do some interpretation at the end. But my background in game development is that I lived in Ukraine for 2 years, and so I came back and got a degree in Russian so that I could just get through college quickly. And then I started a construction business, and then I got an MBA in marketing. That's the game development background. So, you know, the pedigree of a true game developer. When I was about 3/4 of the way through business school, I got talking to a friend of mine who had just gone through the same program. And we were talking about our experiences at IU, and discovered that the thing that we had loved the most was the simulation that we did about 3 weeks into the program called Littlefield. And Littlefield was an operations simulation, which basically meant it was simulating an assembly line, a factory. And so you have consumer demand that fluctuates. You have different items you can put on the floor of the factory. You can rearrange them. You can purchase additional capacity. You can reroute things in different directions. If you get confident in your ability to build things quickly enough to meet demand, you can start charging more. This is Littlefield. And during Littlefield, the simulation lasted for 3 weeks, and it updated once per hour for 3 weeks continuously. And in that 3 weeks, I don't think I slept at all. I had my laptop next to my bed. I would wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about Littlefield and turn on my laptop and check to see how our team was doing. And then I'd wake up in the morning and check Littlefield again. And then on my way to school, I would check Littlefield, and I would get there and I would check Littlefield. And it was by far the most engaging thing we did. And in talking to my friend, kind of discovering that this was also the part that really engaged him. And so we thought, there are a lot of things in business that games could teach well, right? In our finance classes, we were learning about the time value of money. In our operations classes, we were learning about things like batching and process and logistics and things like that. This is SimCity, right? Like this is stuff that games were meant to do. In our marketing classes, we would do these marketing simulations where you would run data analysis on different demographics and then try to create products that would fit the needs of the market, all through these simulations. So we thought, what if somebody could get their MBA doing nothing but playing games? So on this idea, we decided to start trying to build these things out. And before long, we figured out that this was in 2010. And so around that time, we both kind of became enamored with the iPhone and decided to try to build an iPhone app. So we did, or at least we did start to build an iPhone app. And we got about 3 months into the process and realized that, A, we didn't really know what we were doing technically, right? Like he didn't know how to code. And so he had started to learn, you know, he's going through all the Objective-C books and everything, you know, because this is what you do if you want to build an iPhone app, right? And then we not only did he not know really how to do things technically, but we didn't know how to do it from a product design standpoint, right? Like we didn't understand the process of like, how do you take this idea that you've got and make it into a game that you actually publish and maybe people even might want to download and maybe even might want to pay money for. So this is the position we are in. After about 3 months of this, of just kind of this ballooning, aimless, featureful, but not implemented project, we had a conversation. And the conversation was something like this. We have no idea what we're doing. We need to build something simpler. And so we thought, what's the absolute simplest thing we can possibly build? We both really like the idea that a good game teaches something. And I think most of our conversations were kind of revolving around that idea. So we thought, okay, what's something that we could teach really, really simply? I have kids. One of my kids was about 4 years old at the time and learning their alphabet. So we thought, okay, let's make a game that teaches letter sounds. A makes the A sound, B makes the B sound. So let's make a game that just teaches that, right? This is like the simplest thing ever. So we did. And this was a lot simpler to code than kind of the world dominating ideas that we had when we first started. In fact, when we first started, we used to joke back and forth in our emails that any good idea needs to end in world domination. We would say this to each other, but we kind of meant it. We grew to not mean it quite as much over the months and the years. So anyway, we decided to build this game, and we didn't really have a budget. We didn't have the ability to. Oh, you got the remote. Good. So we didn't really have a great budget. Our budget was like 0, in addition to whatever time we spent on it was not at our other jobs. And so we couldn't spend money paying other people to do things. We definitely couldn't pay people to build the art, and we couldn't pay people to build the code. And we also kind of wanted to learn how to do those things. So here's what we made. This is Alphabet Zoo. The art is, well, you know, it's what you'd expect from someone that doesn't do game art. Can I have some volume? That's weird. All right. Well. I don't know why it's not picking up the volume. The volume's kind of like critically.
Try plugging it back in.
Do what?
Make sure I'm plugging and plugging back in.
That's a good idea. No signal? Yes, signal.
The lock switch is off and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, when I unplug it. Okay.
Is it just that app that does that?
I heard the other one.
Super Hexagon was doing just fine.
Yeah.
Well,
The classic rule of demo.
if it can go wrong, it will. Yeah, it's not getting audio, but nothing is. My iPad's not getting audio. Okay, well that's fine. For now, I'll just tell you what it did, and I'll demo it without audio. So anyway, the way this app worked was you getting it? Now, let me just try one more thing. The audio is kind of critical here. Just try it on an app that we know the audio works on. Yeah, see, now the iPad's actually messing it up.
If your hardware good on the iPad.
That's what we're gonna do. All right, well, I'll just talk while I'm doing it. So the idea behind Alphabet Zoo was that you just have the letters, and when you tap a letter, it makes a sound. If you tap the letter enough times, then eventually it makes an animal. And then after that, you get to hear a very unrealistic sound that the animal makes. So this is kind of the idea behind Alphabet Zoo. And we didn't really, we had kind of some interesting discussions when we were developing this because, you know, we had just come from this idea of let's build something huge and grandiose and amazing. And we decided pretty, you know, after a few months of trying that wasn't really gonna work. And so we didn't really have expectations for this other than that it was going to give us a data point, right? Like that we could, you know, this may not be the greatest app in the world, but at least it would give us just something to go on. And if we publish it to the App Store and it just gets a couple of downloads, but at least we have an app on the App Store. So you know, let's just start there. And so that's what we did. Hey, it's making soundy sounds again. It's making sounds. All right. Alex, you want to see if, oh, there it is. Hey, it works. All right, victory. Okay. The thing is, after all the effort it took to get the sound to come up, it's going to be kind of anticlimactic. In any case. Anteater. Snake. Cat. Pea. Porcupine. This is alphabet. So we published it to the App Store. We went to bed that night, and we woke up the next morning and we checked our figures. 46 downloads. Awesome. We were so happy. So
Was the app still paid?
it was free. Because, at this point, we're just thinking, like,
Let's get something out there.
let's just get, nobody's going to pay for this, but at least we can try to get it downloaded. So then we go to bed the next night. We wake up the next morning. We check our figures. And I look at the App Store on the educational charts, and it's the #2 app in the world in education.
Wow.
It had gotten 4,500 downloads the previous day. It was like, if you looked at the charts for all these different countries, it was like #1, #2, #3, like all the way down. And so we have no idea what's going on. I took a screenshot of it and sent it to the two guys that I made it with, and they both thought it was Photoshop. But so to this day, why was that successful? It's tricky to say. It could be that it just has the word alphabet in it, and that's just something that a lot of people download when they want to give their kids something on the iPad. I've watched other apps that have not gone on to that great level of success that quickly. But I guess kind of the point is that the only way to, what if we had spent another year working on that first game concept? No information, no feedback about what we were doing. And really no guarantee that we would even have a better product pop up the other end. But in any case, one thing we did learn after that was that people were willing to download it for free. They were less willing to download it for money. And so in this particular instance, it was just silly enough that their kids liked it, just optimized enough in its app title that people just kind of encountered it, I think, when they were searching for alphabet, which is a pretty common search term, I think. And but not much more than that. I mean, let's be honest. like some of the reviews say the art looks like it was done by a 3rd grader. I don't disagree. Some of the reviews are from from people that say that it's scared their kids. The older demographic in particular did not find it that engaging. In any case, it was something. And so this is Alphabet Zoo. Alphabet Zoo ended up being featured on 60 Minutes. It was on a special about autism, because again, kids, they don't really care if the art looks chunky. Well, I mean, they do to a certain degree, but they're probably not as refined as us adults. And so they were fine with it. And there was this special about iPads being used with kids with autism, and right there is just videos of these kids playing Alphabet Zoo. And so the philosophy behind this, though, as I said before, was let's just get some data points. Let's just get something out there. So after that, we continued to kind of experiment with and abuse Alphabet Zoo in a lot of ways, just in order to try to kind of learn some things. We put an in-app purchase into Alphabet Zoo that basically led to something that wasn't that useful or valuable, but we just wanted to learn how to make in-app purchases, and so we did. We attempted to build a little game on top of it where you could do some assessment of how well you know the alphabet, and then you'd get stars, and it didn't really work that well. But again, this is kind of a theme, is it's not that hard to experiment, right? This was a few people times a few weeks worth of attempts at art development. All the font here is just a font we found for free online. The grass, I think the wavy grass going back and forth, I think we bought that on like Shutterstock for $10 or something. This is scrappy. In any case, after that, we thought, okay, this is enough. This is enough that we want to like keep doing this, right? So our experiment was successful in the sense that it was getting downloads. The next question is, can we get downloads for money? So we did a couple of things after that. I didn't know how to program, and kind of went my whole life believing that I just kind of wasn't smart enough to do that. Ironically, I wanted from a very young age to be a game developer when I grew up, but just kind of didn't think I had programming in me. And after Alphabet Zoo saw a little bit of success, I found a development kit called Corona that uses, the dead simple Lua scripting language, and so I picked up Corona and started learning. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this next one because it wasn't even that successful, but I made it and I published it. And at the time, this was actually kind of a big deal. So this is Cowbugs. Okay, so it's one. All right, this is all it does. 2, 3. Okay, after 5 seconds, you know everything there is to know about Cowbugs. There's nothing else to it, right? 1. The touch targets are easy to hit. Guess what's going to happen next? 4. Yeah, 4. That's all it does. 8 randomly placed sounds from GarageBand, a weird little walking. I am hesitant to even call it an algorithm. So that's Cowbugs. It wasn't that successful. It's made probably a few $1,000s over its entire life, but again, it was something. So on to something that's a little bit more interesting. The next project that we decided to do was around this time, we were both kind of getting our feet under us at least a little bit more as programmers and also as designers. I think just we're thinking a lot more about this idea of what makes a good learning game. And we settled on this idea that ideally a good learning game would present gameplay and learning in a way that was integrated in some way. So as a bad example of this, you might play a game where you throw ninja stars for a couple of minutes, and then you're interrupted and you do some math problems, and then the math problems stop, and then you throw ninja stars for a while, and then you stop and you go back to the math problems, right? It's a little bit like a toll booth. You're just going along, and then all of a sudden there's this thing that really kind of has no contextual reason to be there, but oh, it's there. All right, do math, because math isn't fun, so we have to just insert it into something that is fun. This is kind of a quintessential poorly designed learning game. What we wanted to do was build something where a game mechanic was paired with a learning concept that kind of made sense with that game mechanic. So around that time, we found some sample code that implemented kind of a basic Fruit Ninja clone, but in this Corona SDK that we were using. And we thought, okay, in this way, the game mechanic is taking something and splitting it into smaller chunks, taking a whole, splitting it into maybe even its component parts. So you guys could probably all guess what. In fact, we could probably come up with 10 game ideas just out of that. What the learning game where you can take a whole thing and split it into its component parts. So you could go a lot of different directions with this, but here's the direction we went with it. So this is a game where you do that, but with numbers instead of with fruit. So if a prime number goes up, it cannot be split, so you leave it alone. But if composites go up, you split them. So, again, it's not particularly complex. This was me after, I think, 6 months or so of programming. Eventually the numbers get higher, and you can replay the game so that it's so the numbers come faster and stuff like that. But the gameplay kind of makes sense within the learning context, right? the learning objective is to take this thing that kind of naturally occurs in numbers, where a whole is being split, and you layer that on top of the game mechanic, where the whole is being split. So so Factor Samurai was kind of our second big project together, and for this one we hired an illustrator, as you can probably tell. That is not my illustration in there. So this was nice. I think we paid probably $2,000 or $3,000 for the art, and then just kind of built the gameplay around it. And when we were done with Factor Samurai, we thought, okay, we have got something really good in our hands. So we published it. We decided to charge $1 for it. And the first day, I think we got 17 downloads. Second day, 11. Third, 3. Fourth, 2. And it kind of hovered at less than 5 for about a week. And so you can imagine the phone calls that were going on at that point. All right, this is not something, once again, we've built something that we think is great, but the people are not willing to pay money for. So we decided at that point it was clear that we weren't going to make money on it just by charging. So we thought, well, what the heck, let's switch it to free. At the very least, we can get some maybe publicity out of it. If it gets a lot of downloads, maybe we can at least point to it and say, hey, look, we have successful apps. Hire us for contract work or something like that. And so we switched it to free. It went up the charts. It did pretty good. It was, it'd get a few thousand downloads a day. Eventually, after about a year of this, of kind of free downloads varying from the hundreds to the thousands, it got to be, I think, probably September or so. And it crossed the 100,000 download mark. And it was clear that we were going to have to wait a lot longer for it to cross any other threshold of note. But sometimes you kind of think of things in these terms, like, oh, I can tell someone that my app was downloaded 100,000 times. So we thought, well, it cost 100,000. Let's go back and just switch it to paid again, and just kind of see if anything's changed. So we switch it to $1, and next morning we wake up, downloads dropped, but not like this, right? Just a little bit. And all of a sudden, now we've got some revenue to match the downloads. We thought, okay, this is good. We made a few $100s yesterday. So let's try charging $2 for it. So we charge $2 for it. Wake up the next morning. Downloads drop a little more. Revenue goes like this. This is consumer elasticity. See, my business school degree came in. So then we raise the price to $3. Price drops, goes up. Then we drop the educational discount. Downloads don't dip at all. Revenue goes up. So actually, after getting a few points, you can kind of come up with a curve that demonstrates kind of exactly where your optimal revenue is. Because at some point, the downloads are going to drop down to 0, and then your revenue is going to be 0. So we figured out that the optimal price is $2.99, and so we left it there. And Factor Samurai, in the years since, has done good. It's made us both, we're not millionaires, but probably 100,000-aires. But a couple interesting things about this, though. First of all, I've thought a lot about this. Like, why did an app that we couldn't charge for initially end up suddenly being like chargeable? One of the things that was pretty insightful that we figured out after kind of looking at the data a little bit more was that most of our installs were on iPads, and that after a certain point, Apple started telling you what percent, or rather how many downloads are bulk educational purchases. So we figured out that most of our downloads were in iPads and most of them were in schools, and that these purchases would come in waves, right? So there was kind of a baseline of under $100 a day that never really fluctuated that much. It fluctuated by maybe 20%. And then on top of that, you'd have these clumps. And so you'd go a few days with nothing, and then all of a sudden like $1,000. Then you go along, and all of a sudden $200. And so these schools, just kind of imagine to yourself, Louisville Public Schools goes out and buys a bunch of iPads for their kindergartners or their 5th graders or whatever. And what do they do next? They ask, well, hey teachers, what are the kids playing? What do you want on these iPads that we just bought you? we've got a budget of $25. Give me your top 5 apps or whatever. And so the game was this game that now had kind of propagated its way through schools as a free version. Now people had exposure to it, and so they were asking for it. And so, now at this point, the school buys a bunch of iPads, and they say, all right, teachers, what games do your kids like? And now they know that the kids like Factor Samurai. So the kids ask for it, teachers ask for it, the schools pay for it, and everybody's happy, or at least we were happy. And so that's kind of the way Factor Samurai went. I think the life of the app, it's probably kind of here on the curve. So I think the days of the really big downloads are probably over for that game. But this was 6 weeks of work from a person that I'm sure if any of you guys are programmers, I'm sure you know more than I do about programming. I can almost guarantee you. I'm really not that good at it. But this was something that we, after publishing several apps and kind of figuring out, okay, this is our target. Our target is schools. We're going to make a learning game that's compelling to people, and kind of tripped and fell into the revenue model, actually, because how else were people doing revenue at the time? This was 2012. Some people just sell stuff outright, and that works if your game is well publicized or well marketed or featured by Apple or just really popular. Or you make it free and just make additional content available via in-app purchases, which is kind of problematic because most schools actually cannot do in-app purchases. And so, what are you going to do? In fact, a lot of educational review sites don't, they evaluate games based on various criteria, and how well does it teach the content? Does it insert ads? And one of the criteria frequently is, are there in-app purchases? They look at it as a very strong negative. I think educational games, by and large, people either like to pay nothing for, or pay just outright, but definitely not through advertising and definitely not through in-app purchases. So that's kind of how Factor Samurai worked. Once again, I think kind of the takeaway I get from this is that, in fact, just kind of thinking back to when we were doing these weird pricing experiments, it was a little bit like we've made this little anthill and we kept picking it up and shaking it. And we had a lot of conversations at the time about what will people think if we do this, right? If we released an app for free and then we suddenly charge $1 for it, are the people who got it for free going to get mad? Nobody cared. Well, now we've charged $1 for it for a few months. What if we switch it back to free? Are the people who paid $1 going to get mad? Nobody cared. What about this app that was free and now we're charging $3 for it? Are the people who got it are the people who paid $3 going to be mad that it used to be free? Nobody said anything. Okay, we're doing a free promotion and switching the $3 app back to free for a week. Nobody cared. They were just glad that it was free. So I'm not advocating that you abuse the people that download your app. If I was, we could talk about social integration and push notifications. But what I am advocating is that people actually can be pretty forgiving if you're building something that they really like. That's been my experience, at least. So Factor Samurai was a good experience. The next app that I'm going to show you, this came kind of as a result of some of the previous apps. So this was at the end of maybe the second year or so of game development, I was contacted by a professor who built a curriculum focused around how to teach kids how to read. So the Alphabet Zoo game that we demonstrated, that does a tiny little chunk. It does one thing reasonably well, but obviously there's a lot more that needs to follow after that. And so this professor developed a curriculum that is based on the idea, well, several ideas, but one of the main ones is that if you take words that share a common ending, for example, it, so IT, that's the ending. And if you get a bunch of short words together that all end in it, split, bit, hit, fit, hit, these all end in it. And if you group words by ending like that, and then create a game, create some sort of activity that uses all of those words together, but not just randomly, but contextually. You know, if we're going to learn about hit, then we need to hit things. If we're going to learn about pit, then we need to interact with the pit in some way. So the words are being used contextually. They're being used kind of in their proper way. And it turns out that if you repeat the words enough and give kids a chance to create the words by dragging the letters together, and if you give them a chance to read about what they did afterwards, and give them kind of a playful, a reason to know what those letters and words mean, then this can be kind of a springboard. It can help kids who just know the sounds the letters make, and it can get them to that next step where they're actually starting to read basic words. So this was the research that was done, and I was approached by this researcher who said, could we somehow, this would be really good on the iPad, right? It didn't exist for the iPad before that. This was all using physical objects. So they had a series of lesson plans where you would, for example, you'd have a Xerox copy picture of a cap and a strap and a flap, and you'd cut those out and you'd snap them together with a stapler, and the kids could wear the little cap. So this was a physical curriculum that they were using with kindergarten teachers and other people to teach kids how to read. So she approached me and said, could we do something like this for the iPad? And so what we came up with was the idea that you need some sort of a place where all of these activities can kind of fit together, even though they're going to have a variety of kind of weird, disparate contexts, right? Because, you know, that's one thing. But what about app? You might have a cap and a flap and a map, and you might maybe like tap them and zap them. You know, how do you put those in the same game as the bit, fit, rock, split game? And so we came up with this idea of a hideout, a treehouse, a big area where there's just things all over the place. And every area kind of has its own function, and there's water, and there's caves, and there's branches, and there's fields, and there's just all these little places where you can do kind of whatever random stuff you want. Right, you know, much like programming languages, maybe you need something that's kind of extensible because you want to actually throw a lot of different things at it. So this was also kind of my first experience as a consultative developer. And in fact, we were just talking about this on the way here with Alex about how it's easy to take for granted the fact that not everybody knows what you know, even with very limited experience in game development, right? If you've done one game jam, you probably know more than a person who might approach you and ask you if you could build a game. You know, if you've done 10 of them, then you know a lot more. If you published anything, you know way more, right? Even if it's some piece of trash like AlphabetZoo, you know way more than most people because they can't even just get that one thing published, right? And it was nothing, right? Like I didn't know how to draw, but we published it. And just in doing that, that sets you ahead of so many people. And so in that light, this next experience was interesting because here I was working with a researcher who obviously didn't know the first thing, who knew even less about iPad development than I did. And at the time, I didn't really know that much either. And so, but we started talking about, okay, you know, what does this look like? And I suddenly found myself acting very much like a game development expert, even though, you know, in the true imposter syndrome way, I did not feel very much like an expert. But, you know, compared to someone who's never even thought about it, you are. And so, so we started talking and sketching, and for a very long time, kind of prototyped our way through some of these ideas. So here's what we came up with. At the very beginning, we paid someone to do the artwork as well, because, well, you know, I wasn't going to do it. So this is how. All right, hit. So first of all, treehouse, right? So you can have a lot of different stuff going on here, and it's in this big kind of variegated treehouse context, and so it doesn't really matter that you're trying to do a bunch of different types of things. So let's play it.
So this is the letter I, it, this is the letter T. When you put them together, here's the sound they make. They go
What sound is this about again?
There are lots of words that ended it, but none of them start the same. So drag each new letter to make a new word and use them to relate.
It'd be really funny if there was a bug and it just said it indefinitely. In fact, the problem with making these weird little songs is that now people always are looking for opportunities to harass you. So, I'll just be like, like I've been a scoutmaster for like 12 years, and so my scouts will come up to me like, boo, boo, boo. The worst ones. Because, at this point, this is what I'm known for among them. All right, let's see. So we're going to make the words.
Fit. 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 Good work. Now let's play a game with these words. Hit the rocks to split them into bits so they fit into the pit.
Okay. So this is like, in terms of game mechanics, this is like beyond simple, right? This is nothing. This is like sub game jam level game mechanics. But every second of the app that you've seen so far was reviewed by a researcher, right? Was reviewed by a person who has spent the past 40 years studying how kids learn to read. Okay, let's do it.
We have a physics engine behind us?
This one does use physics, yeah. Yeah, not all of them do. And some of them do, even though they shouldn't, because at the time I just didn't know how to do stuff. But
Is it still Corona?
yeah, this is all correct.
Good work.
Good work,
Now let's read about what we did.
right? This is the researcher. Now, after they split the rocks into bits, they need to be able to tap each word.
We split the rocks into
Why are they separate? Because the researcher said so. That's why.
bits. The bits fit into the pit.
So that's it. So you have all these activities, and they do the same kind of thing. Eventually, exit that for just a second. So we started that with just 3 endings, it, app, and op. And then eventually we wanted to do more, and so they paid me to do some more. This one was a little bit tricky because after the first version, the illustrator no longer had time to work on the app anymore. And so I actually tried to use a few different people for illustration, and we just couldn't seem to catch the right vision. So I called the old illustrator back, said, "Are you positive you can't work on this?" He said, "Oh, I'm busy, sorry." So what he did do though for me is he explained to me his own workflow. He said, "Well, okay, let me just tell you how I made the old stuff, so at least that will get you started." This was during the time I was really struggling with another illustrator that just kind of just wasn't catching the vision. So he said, what I do is I draw the whole thing out in a pen, just with a pen. I scan it into Illustrator, I live trace it, and then in Illustrator I get rid of the artifacts so that it looks a little bit more kind of coloring bookish. And then I send it to Photoshop, and then I color it and I texture it, and I export it from Photoshop as Ping 24s, which then I use. And I thought, oh, well, I can attempt to draw things using a pen. I can scan things into Illustrator. I can try to do all that stuff. And so beyond the first 3 activities, no signal, come on. Beyond the first 3 activities, everything else is me. So just as a point of reference, let's remember the snail. Remember the snails, just like the movie. And so I don't know. Here's another one. Talk. I'll skip the song this time.
Dock. Rock.
So,
Block. Sock. Good work. Now let's play a game with these words.
so this is,
These blocks and rocks are on a dock.
it's probably not quite as good as the other stuff, but in terms of style, it's actually not that far off.
Put them
right?
into the socks.
So, again, you have to group the words by ending. So, of course, you have to get a bunch of rocks and blocks and knock them over, and then, put them into the socks. And
Sock. No.
so,
No.
but
Sock.
what I learned, I guess I am getting kind of didactic about this. I thought that I was just going to tell stories, but I guess I am going to tell you my interpretations of these stories as well. I always kind of thought of the artwork as this thing that consisted 100% of raw talent and 0% of like mastering some sort of tool chain. And what I discovered through sheer circumstance, just kind of needing to somehow get this art done, was that a lot of it actually is about tools. Not all of it, right? Like the best artwork is not just done because people have mastered the tools. It's, they're opinionated, right? But you can actually get a lot farther than I expected by just kind of mastering the workflow. And so what I realized, for example, drawing a block like this, it really has nothing to do with the fact that I have really good control over drawing a block. And it has more to do with the fact that I just drew it 10 times before I got it right. But the 10th one worked out okay. And so that was the one we used. And that really is not a statement about talent. That's just a statement about process. And so, the socks, they don't look great. But the wood, I don't know, it looks a little bit woody, right? It looks kind of like a dock. It's not too bad. And this was not this is strictly about process. It had nothing to do with I don't think I'm any better than any of you at drawing a picture of a dock. It's just that I figured out this workflow by which pretty much any person could do it if you just redo your work enough times and get really good with the eraser, and you can kind of work your way around these things. So in any case, this is Hideout, and which kind of leads to I guess new lessons from Hideout that didn't necessarily apply to Factor Samurai. One of those is that there are, I don't know if this applies to every market, but at least in the market that I'm in, which is learning games, there are people combing the App Store looking for good stuff, and by and large, not finding it. After Hideout had been published for about 3 months, we were contacted by some researchers at Tufts University and MIT Media Lab, who run something called the Global Literacy Project. And the Global Literacy Project, their mission is to put learning software onto cheap Android tablets and to just distribute them all over the world. In third world countries, they've got various sites in Africa and Pakistan, even some in the United States. And they just, they broker deals with developers to get the software for free. They put it on the Android devices, and then they send them to these remote villages with basic instructions on how to use them. And then, hopefully if everything goes according to plan, they start to actually teach these people how to read. So we were contacted by them. They sent us an email and said, hey, we've never seen anything like Hideout. As you know, there's a lot of stuff on the App Store. Most of it is either fun, but pedagogically dubious, or somewhat pedagogically correct, but not fun, or usually neither. Because you have game designers making games, and you have educational researchers making the things that they make, and how do you get all that stuff into one person's brain to make something that kind of does both? Well, so they contacted us, and we're actually in the process of the partnership with them, where we put Hideout onto these devices and send it out to places. But I guess my point with that, though, is that I think in a lot of ways, an app can become kind of a calling card for other work, which is what I've discovered. eventually you end up with this portfolio of stuff that you can point to. And for a person that has no experience with game development or no experience with the App Store, well, here's the 6 apps that I've published, and here's some of the stuff that they've done, and that can be useful. So that's kind of the those are the things that I've built. Those are some of the main ones that that I can talk about. After a while, you get contacted by people and you start building things that people actually don't want you to just talk about publicly. But those are some of the main ones. What questions do you guys have? I've made some kind of broad assertions about how some of this stuff works, but what do you guys want to know? Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, a question I had was when you what's it called? Factor Ninja?
Yeah, Factor Samurai.
Oh, Factor Samurai. Sorry. When you were working on Factor Samurai and not working on it, well, I don't know. When you were like a year out and you were like, let's start charging for this again.
Yeah.
Did you ever do more work on the app after the first 6 weeks?
Oh no, we didn't. Did nothing. Actually, when the iPad Retina came out, it threw a really weird bug, and we had to go through and re-export everything. Other than that, no, not really. After we started charging for it, occasionally, from time to time, we would do small updates. Like eventually we did Game Center integration. Eventually I think we did one other update where we updated the graphics a little bit. I wrote it originally in Corona. Eventually my buddy wanted to rewrite it using SpriteKit. So now the Factor Samurai that we just played, I think, is written in SpriteKit. But, and this is critical, none of those things moved the needle at all. But I think this kind of gets to
sales.
What's that?
Sales?
No, yeah, nothing. And so I think this actually kind of gets at another point, which is that I think in the process of creating a product, there's this balance that you have to kind of beat your head against and figure out with regards to whether you want to improve existing functionality or add new features, right? And so Twitter's going through this right now. A lot of people go through it. We all go through it. Right? Do we keep like bolting new stuff onto the thing we made, or do we just make the thing that we made so darn good, just through polishing kind of the existing stuff that that people want to download it? And I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that in not only in Factor Samurai but in Alphabet Zoo, we attempted new features, and in most cases we kind of discovered that people were there mostly for the first thing we built, not for the stuff that we added onto it. That isn't to say that features are bad, that you should never do it, but sometimes you might build a feature that's useful to one subset of your audience that actually alienates another subset of them. They're not every feature is universally loved. And we thought about when we were building Hideout, for a while I thought about, is there a way to build this as an extension of Alphabet Zoo? Because again, we're thinking through these, like true MBAs, we're thinking like, okay, how do we leverage our assets? What are our assets here? Well, our assets are, Alphabet Zoo, that's an asset. Okay, we have 100,000 users. What can we do with these users? How can we leverage them to, spring to something new? And no, like what we discovered was that's, it was usually, not that there's zero ROI of adding new features, but I think, unless you're talking about polishing something, I think there's just more ROI in starting something new. That's assuming you have a lot of ideas. If you have 0 ideas, then just take the thing that you made and keep it.
Well, is Hideout a upfront publishing model, like upfront cost?
Yeah. So Hideout, because I built it for a university,
okay, so
for the first year it was free.
Okay.
It was free, yeah, for about the first year. And because they weren't doing it to make money, They were doing it because they wanted people to see that they had made this awesome app. And so, I was paid as a contractor, but that was it. So after a while, though, it was clear that they didn't really have the resources to maintain it. So I actually bought it from them, and now I charge for it. Hideout, in honesty, Hideout is not as successful as Factor Samurai. But I can think of kind of some plausible explanations for that. One of them is that it's, while the features that do exist, I think are reasonably good, the content, I don't think, is expanded quite to the level that it needs to be. So for example, the curriculum that this is based on is a set of 30 or 32 word endings, right? If you look at those nine word endings that I had on the home screen. Oh, see, now it's going to make me, let's just restart it. If you look at these 9 endings, I don't think anybody would look at these and say, oh, once you know these 9 word endings, you're going to know how to read, right? It's a small section of what's out there. And so I think, in order to really be able to make a case for people to download Hideout, it needs to feel more complete, which actually is kind of an interesting discussion in the context of what we were talking about, right? Adding new features versus just getting to full coverage. Maybe some would argue that we should have waited and not done anything and built the whole entire app with the 32 word endings in a nice big package and then just unleashed it. But no, Hideout's actually the thing that I'm working on the most right now. The model that I'm going to use, and this is one that's been, I'm not going to call it common, but it's one that's used sometimes with schools, is to actually create 2 versions. One is a version that has in-app purchases, and so you can put it out there for free, making it easier for people to get it. And for people who are using it at home, parents with their kids, you make content available in small chunks. I think people are more likely to pay $1 10 times than they are to pay $10 once. And so we make additional content available via in-app purchases for that version. But then for schools, what we'll do is just create a school version. It'll be branded as such. The actual, the text in the app description will say, this is specifically meant for schools that do not have the capacity to make in-app purchases. And so then schools can just pay for it outright, in addition to, downloading the free one and doing whatever they want with that. So that's kind of the model for Hideout. Again, sometimes different stuff is suited for different models. There are, how much would Flappy Bird have made if it was in-app purchases instead of advertising? I don't know. Seemed to do okay with advertising. But, again, if you're in schools, you can't have ads. And in-app purchases, they don't really have a way to do it. So, sometimes a lot of it just kind of depends on, not only your target audience, but the type of game. I kind of have no interest in building a game that uses, consumable currency as a way of just kind of fleecing people for money over and over again. It's a proven model, right? Like almost all of the top apps on the App Store besides Minecraft use that as their model. But I'm not super interested in that. If that's not your model, what are you left with? Pay for content, pay for, kind of additional gameplay, additional time through in-app purchases, or just kind of charge for it outright. And there's definitely a certain subset of developers that have adopted that philosophy pretty faithfully, right? Like that Super Hexagon game I was playing. There's a group out there that's like, I'm publishing it. Here's what I charge. Here's the game. It's awesome. Download it. Right? Monument Valley. So anyway, I don't remember what the question was.
Well, I have another one.
Yeah, sure.
I know that to get featured or ranked in the App Store, you have to stay in good standing with your app updates. Have you seen a certain strategy, or you try to apply a certain strategy with updating?
What do you mean stay in good standing?
Well, I've just heard from
Just
other
like
app developers that if you're like want to get featured or you want to have a higher ranking in the charts, that updating your app every
That they
month
take
or 3
frequency of
months.
updating into account
Yeah.
when featuring.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be true. I think that,
Whether or not it's free or paid updates.
well, so I will say this. Apple likes to showcase technology that makes their technology look good. And so if Apple comes out with,
Like
some sort of,
FreePlay Kit.
what's that?
Like they just came out with FreePlay Kit recently.
Yeah, so if they come out with something like that, some sort of new, I don't know, sometimes games are a bad example for this, but like if they come out with a bunch of new graphics APIs and you create like a photo sharing app that utilizes those, when they came out with Twitter integration, if you have an app that does that really well, Apple wants to showcase apps that showcase them. There's definitely some reciprocity there. So, so that may be part of it. I've never had an app like front page featured by Apple. Once that happens, things are very good for you for a little while. But in terms of rankings, I don't know. They may take it into account, but I don't know.
Have you felt the shift in increasing competition in terms of games submitted to the App Store from when you guys started in 2012 to 2016?
There are a lot of things submitted to the App Store, but like if you just open up your device, you used to be able to do this. I don't know if you can do it anymore. You used to be able to say to actually do an App Store search for the things submitted that day. And I remember doing this for Alphabet Zoo, and we found that like in the list of apps that were submitted that day, just in the education category. And out of all of those apps, I mean, even after like several weeks, like most of them didn't have any reviews. Most of them, I mean, I don't know. My experience with just randomly trying apps on the App Store is that most of the stuff out there is junk. I mean, heck, I've personally like contributed to that. I haven't even showed you all my games. But competition. So take learning games, right? We published Hideout, and we're contacted by somebody else who said, we have teams of interns who just sit here and like download reading games from the App Store and evaluate them. And this thing you guys made is better than all of them. And so is it more competitive? I don't know. Like I think it depends on the quality of what you're building. Okay. Even looking at the stuff that's featured, it tends to be stuff that's highly polished, that's well executed. But even then, sometimes you get some stuff that's not. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. My opinion is still that a game that's highly polished, that does what it's trying to do, and particularly, if you're talking about a certain market, if it's really zeroed in on that, with education, you get so many games out there. In fact, interestingly, the top reading app on the App Store is called Endless Reader, and boy, you want to see someone get mad, show that to a literacy researcher. It's terrible. It breaks, a number of rules. Articles have been written on it. This is kind of the high watermark, though, on the App Store for reading games. And so, yeah, it's competitive in the sense that there's a ton of stuff out there, but I think there is still plenty of room for good ideas that are well executed. And that's two things: good ideas that are well executed. Yeah. Anyway,
trying to get how to word this. You said with Hideout you worked with subject matter experts, you have reading experts, learning experts, and how's the kind of back and forth between the developer, you and the developers versus the subject matter expert? I'm like, I guess, because I don't know how, how your experience was with how much they know about current, design and user and game design experience and stuff, and how is that, going back and forth with them, about them making design decisions that, that are bad? Yeah, not so much focused around game design.
No, that's really interesting because that was what turned out to be the first of a lot of kind of consultative development, right? And yeah, if you've done anything at all related to game development, you're going to have more experience than most of the people that you're talking to. These tend to be people that sometimes it will be people who just heard about gamification on the internet and they're like, ooh, let's do that, right? Like it happens. Other times it's people who have built something that's legitimately cool, but just can't figure out how to imagine it through a different sort of media, right? And actually, particularly in education, this is a huge problem, right? Like the iPad comes out, and what's the first thing that Pearson wants to do? Scan all of their textbooks into PDFs and then put them on the iPad, right? Like I challenge any of you to think of something less imaginative than that to do with an iPad, than to just put scanned images of textbooks in there. And so, and so, yeah, people may have, they may kind of have mastery over this domain of content or maybe even something else that's interactive. But yeah, what do you do? I think my experience, I used this term at the beginning, or maybe not quite the beginning, of consultative developer. Over the years, I've grown to take that more and more seriously. This idea of kind of stating right from the beginning that the part that they're paying me for is to kind of take the thing that they're an expert in and to figure out how that works in the expertise of game design. I think there is a lot of back and forth. One of the things, though, that I've discovered is that a lot of the time, when somebody who isn't conversant in the language of game development tries to give feedback on game development, they don't have the vocabulary to even know how to describe what they want you to do. And they may not even know what they want you to do. All they know is just kind of this visceral reaction they might have based on their interaction with the thing that you've created, right? And so, but they don't know these, shibboleths that we have between ourselves of like, well, like what's the game mechanic? And like, oh, you want a resource management, do you? This isn't something that someone outside of our field maybe has really thought about. And so in my experience, a lot of the time, I have to just kind of remember that as I'm talking to them, that even if they're saying something, they may not even know what they're asking for or what they're trying to ask for. Right, and so sometimes I'll. This happens. This happens. By the way, all the time with graphic design too. I think, where heaven forbid you're ever asked to make something pop, but right, like we were doing I was doing a piece of an app together with an illustrator once for a third-party client, and the feedback was, this just doesn't look realistic enough. It looks like too silly and like too like cartoonish. And so what do we interpret from that? Okay, do you want it was like kind of a badge insignia type of thing. So we thought, oh, maybe she wants it like photo quality. Do we like take a photo of it and scan it or something? And but we decided let's just kind of keep messing with it. And so we just added we just changed the style of the leaves on the tree or something. We just made them shape differently. And then she was like, oh, this looks great. This is way more realistic. It has nothing to do with realism, right? Like the stroke width and the vector paths, nothing's changed. But this was all simply due to the fact that if we had attempted to interpret her misused language in terms that we understood, we would never get anywhere. And so a lot of the time, it's just kind of a matter of just kind of figuring out, just remembering that sometimes people are I may have mentioned that I lived in Ukraine for 2 years, right? The first 6 months of that was me just going blah blah blah, trying to speak Russian, and then someone else basically translating for me. What this guy was trying to say was this, and I think in giving feedback on games, people are doing that to us, They're attempting to describe something that they don't really have the language to describe all the time. And so you have to take, this wasn't fun, or, could you make this more interactive? What does that even mean? I don't know. And you just have to, either parse it or dig deeper with questions, or just kind of keep fiddling with it, because again, to them, and I shouldn't say us versus them. Like, you could say the same thing about me and a car, right? The part, as far as I'm concerned, you know what a car is? Doors, seats, a steering wheel, tires, the part where you put the gas in, because those are the things that I interface with, right? Everything else is basically opaque to me. The battery, where the jumper cables go, that, as far as I'm concerned, that is the interface of a car. Is that how a car works? Of course not. But to me, a car is the part of it that I interact with. To other people, the game is the part of the game that they interact with. And so, I mean, I'm not good at this either. I have to constantly remind myself. They don't know what you know about what's sitting underneath this thing. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I just had one more. So, like, looking at Hideout,
Yeah.
it's like clearly really well thought out and researched and stuff, but it also has it takes a lot longer for someone playing that to sort of like get the hook of the app.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't get to the activity until what, like 45 seconds in.
And then all the other things that are like successful in the App Store where someone's able to open it and like in 15 seconds, they like sort of get it,
Mm-hmm.
And so it does seem like maybe if it's like being targeted toward institutions, then they might have more patience for that kind of thing. But I'm sort of wondering like how you get people to actually play it.
Yeah, no, like that's it's a really good question. I mean, so sometimes when I'm building this kind of stuff, I try to kind of frame development in terms of two questions. What does the first minute of gameplay look like? And what does an average minute of gameplay look like? So, like, if I open Flappy Bird, I don't know why I keep going to Flappy Bird. What's my first minute in Flappy Bird? What's my average minute in Flappy Bird? What's my yeah, exactly. What's my first minute of Plants vs. Zombies? What's my average minute of Plants vs. Zombies? Plants vs. Zombies is actually a really good one, because my first minute involves me learning some incredibly basic things that I wouldn't even blink at later. Average minute is a little bit different. In terms of how to do that with Hideout, I think it may be that what's engaging to us is different than what's engaging to the kids. Because to me, I look at, well, actually here, let me rewind. I have a 4-year-old daughter. And there's a channel on YouTube where this guy just sings these songs about letters. And all he does is just yells as loud as he can. A is a letter of the alphabet. Ah, 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 ah. Or just like this for minutes and minutes. For every single letter, for different like letter combinations. And my daughter will watch that mesmerized. And so I think the feedback that I get from kindergarten teachers is they love the song. Like they want to play it over and over again. They sing it even when they're not in the app. And so I don't know. I do think that there's, maybe there are better ways to kind of onboard somebody to get somebody right from the beginning. But
did the researcher make the music?
No, that was me. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the music, I was thinking about a Rush song in the shower, and next thing you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of, where's my thing in there? Anyway, yeah.
For your first apps, did you do any advertising, or if you talked about the start? No advertising?
No, I didn't talk about it at the beginning. We did no advertising for the first apps or the other ones.
Okay.
Which by the way, I'm not going to say that like you shouldn't advertise them. But no, actually, I take that back. See, I always think of this stuff in terms of like whether it works, and so I was confused. For Factor Samurai, we did do some stuff. For a while we got on and tried to we tried to get it featured on different blogs. We got it written up at different places. And
What do you think your ROI on that was using?
very low, maybe
Very
zero.
low. You
Well,
were-
negative, less than
Okay.
zero, because
So
we
you-
spent money and we didn't get it back.
Okay, so you weren't happy with the advertising.
No, which isn't to say that, I mean, clearly that's important. But it's just not what we focused on. The way that the approach that we've tried to take is that we use the free version of an app essentially as an advertisement for the paid version of itself. And so because teachers download so many free apps, and they're just, they don't have a ton of expendable money from the school district, and so they're just looking for anything they can use. And so we discovered that getting people to download it, at least if it's an educational app, isn't that hard if it's free. It helps if it's optimized, Factor Samurai, it talks a lot about numbers and math and multiplication and factorization in the app description. Alphabet Zoo has the word alphabet right in the name. Hideout, early reading. Boy, that was a conscious decision to call it that instead of just Hideout. I'm sure the fact that early reading is in the title has a lot to do with why it gets downloaded so much. But yeah, the advertising, I don't know, it just never really worked. Here's just along those same lines, here's just another small experience. When Hideout, Factor Samurai, every once in a while we do a free promotion for Factor Samurai where we'll just switch it to free for a week. And when we did it, not the last time, but a year ago, I tracked Twitter mentions of it during the promotion and figured out that, so it was free for 5 days, got downloaded basically 20,000 times a day for those 5 days. And I looked at the Twitter mentions and you could see, not beat for beat, but you could see it spread through Twitter. And the number of, if you added up the number of followers of all of the people that tweeted about it, it was at about 100,000. Now, does that mean that every single one of those people went and got it? I don't think so. Because we did another promotion another time, and it got 106,000 in 1 day. And so I think that was probably some school district. It's like, DC public schools or something. Like, oh, it's free, download it. So I think, a lot of this probably depends on the communities that you're targeting. If you're talking about a teacher community, communities of educators and of decision makers at school systems who all, at least loosely, are connected to each other. Maybe everybody doesn't know everybody, but you can see these networks that this stuff kind of propagates through, and so we experience success in that way. I would imagine that if you were doing that with a free app, but then you had vehicles for revenue inside of that, then it'd be even better. So yeah, that's kind of how that worked. Yeah, go ahead.
We've got a question from Twitter from a Mild Mojo.
Oh yeah, hey, what's up?
What other educational games in the last 20 years got it right in your opinion, filled with pedagogy and void of dubiousness?
Void of dubiousness. Interesting. What do I think about that? Got it completely right is probably a stretch, but I'll tell you some that I like. First, to start off with, to me, a good educational game is one that gives you a reason to master the content. It gives you a reason to master the skill, right? So if I'm teaching a game about physics, there are plenty of really good reasons to learn physics. And if we can contextualize those into a game, that's good. One good reason to learn physics. Oh, hey, perfect. I just thought of an answer. Kerbal Space Program. Kerbal is not, by the way, not trying to be educational, but they are anyway. And so I think, why are they? That's an interesting discussion. To me, it's because, right, you don't answer physics problems on some worksheet, and then as a reward, you get to fly your spaceship. No, like, if you don't understand physics, you do not go to, in the words of XKCD, you will not go to space today, right? If you don't know how to, the learning objective is fully integrated with the gameplay objective, right? Like, there is no gameplay without the learning, because the thing you're learning how to do is precisely what will allow you to play the game better. Not this weird thing that's just kind of toll boothed in the middle. It's like, oh, we're playing, and oh, all right, time for some learning, everybody. It's not fun, but it will be because it's inside of a game. So I think actually Kerbal's a really good example. It teaches, right, like, you have a reason to learn about physics. I was just thinking the other day, actually, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, I think is also a pretty good example of this. They probably didn't get like everything right, but going back to this kind of this first measuring stick, if you master the thing that they're trying to teach you, it helps you play the game better, right? That game gives you a reason to understand geography, and not some weird, like, decontextualized reason. You don't like answer geography questions and then you get to play the game. You answer geography questions because, like, the game is a geography game, and so understanding geography helps you play the game better. So I think that's one. I think there are also a lot of games out there that are they're educational without really even trying to be. So a lot of the stuff that, back to kind of the beginning of the discussion about, business school simulations, there's not that much of a difference between Diner Dash and Littlefield, that operation simulation that we did. A lot of these games, because, the thing about it is, any game that's about resource management, in fact, you could design an entire unit in an MBA operations class just based on plants versus zombies. I'm absolutely certain. Because what's it about, right? Do you invest in upfront capacity? What types of capacity do you invest in, right? Do you batch? Do you get a lot of things at once? Do you wear them down over time? Do you invest in something that will allow you to invest more later, right? Like, this is the kind of stuff you're learning if you're talking about, operational resource management. So I don't know, those are a couple that come to mind. I should have made a nice big list or something. But yeah, anything that gives you a reason to learn. And the thing is, all games do this. I think, what's Super Mario Brothers about? It's about mastery, right? You're learning how to get good at something. I mean, this is learning, right? Like, learning and gameplay, they go together. In a lot of ways, ideally they're indistinguishable from each other. It's just that sometimes in games, I love the tagline for Super Hexagon, that game I had up there before. Super Hexagon is a game that teaches you how to be good at Super Hexagon. That's the tagline. So, fine, but it teaches. And the process of mastery, just like getting good at riding a bike or playing the violin or anything else, the process of mastery is fun. And most educational games, it's like that seems, I don't know if it's too obvious or if they just don't believe it or what. But for some reason, a lot of the time when people are talking about learning games, they feel their like core first assumption before they do anything else is, learning is not that fun. We need to make it fun. Ugh, they're wrong. Anyway, thanks, Mild Mojo. That's a good question. Yeah, let's see. Yeah.
I know that a couple of years ago you had the opportunity to be part of the White House Game Jam.
I did. I should have brought that up. That's a really cool thing.
What was that experience like, and are they planning on doing any more of those? Or?
Oh, yeah. Well, I hope so. It'll be fun. So, White House Game Jam. That was put on by the U.S. Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Department of Education. And basically, they got together a bunch of learning game developers and a bunch of non-learning game developers. So, Rovio was there, Ubisoft, Sony, some of these kind of like Disney sent some people. And they put everybody in a room and had a game jam that was themed on education. And so they didn't really give a lot of ground rules or parameters. Sometimes with these game jams, if you're doing like, Ludum Dare, it's like, okay, here is the asset policy and you must adhere to it or you will die. And it wasn't quite that strict, right? It was mostly about just kind of getting people into a room to be thinking about this. But it was interesting. They gave people a lot of, some of these companies are people that have never really focused on educational games, right? So like, Ubisoft sends a team, these are guys that are working on 3D stuff and they're, 3D Ubisoft games when they're not at the White House Game Jam. And so they tried to kind of seed it with some interesting ideas for learning content. They gave everybody access to, or they pointed everybody to different standards, Common Core standards, next generation science standards. And these actually are kind of a really interesting place to think of learning game ideas. In fact, my wife and I have a binder where we just printed out all the Common Core standards. We just have it in a binder and we have it under our front seat in our van. And if we're ever going on like a long trip, we'll just pull it out and open it up to random standards and just like write down game ideas for each one. Seriously, it's so easy. It's so easy that like they just leap off the page. In fact, a lot of the time you look at the standards and you're like, oh, I know of a game that already does that. I know of a game that already does that. So they gave people, they pointed people to the standards as a way of just kind of starting people off. And then people made a lot of different kinds of stuff. A couple of teams built stuff based around the Electoral College. So, you're trying to, like one was about money in politics, for example. You have a certain amount of money you can pay to put people on the ground in various states, and then another cycle runs, and you win some states and you lose some states based on how many people you have in the various states. So that was one game. Another really interesting game was, this was a team from a university, and what they did was they made a game where you're a space station, or you're a spaceship flying sideways, and you have different types of like cave paths, and at the bottom you have different equations, and you modify the parameters of the equations in order to create a path that the ship can take in order to travel through the caves. So like you create a sine wave down here and it follows it in order to get through a sine wave shaped cave. So that one was kind of interesting. There was another one that was a little bit like that where you were modifying just kind of a standard like slope intercept equation to change the position of different lines on a grid. But instead of just being on a regular grid, there were monsters that were throwing snowballs at you. And so you're trying to erect these different barriers at different angles to like block the snowballs. So a lot of that kind of stuff. I think the Ubisoft team made a game about different kinds of animals thriving in different kinds of environments. So there's like a wolf shark, and your objective was to like allow the wolf shark to survive in different environments. Someone made a game about nutrition. Yeah, a lot of different stuff, but it was cool. We went, we worked on the games for about 2 days, and then we went to the White House and presented. It wasn't like to the president, but it was still in the White House, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, everyone got up and shared a video of the game that they made, and yeah, ours was called Spell Destroyer. So I like games that are pretty simple and kind of visceral. I keep talking about Flappy Bird and Super Hexagon for a reason. Tiny Wings definitely falls into that category as well. Something where it kind of grips you and you almost kind of feel the momentum of the game as you're playing it. I like that kind of stuff. So Spell Destroyer was a game where you had stacks of you had words as kind of a grid of blocks, and the letters were on the blocks, and the words would fall down Tetris style, and you had to figure out whether the word was spelled correctly or not. And if it was not spelled correctly, you zapped it and it blew up. If it was spelled correctly, you could let it drop and it would destroy the layer underneath it. So there's a little bit of Tetris elements, but then also you had to do a lot of very quick kind of reading and apprehension of whether things were spelled correctly. So yeah, that was the White House Game Jam. Yeah, question?
Yeah, what are you working on now and what's next?
Yeah, what am I working on now and what's next? Those are good questions. One of them I'll show you after we turn the video off, because it can't be recorded because of NDAs. But the main thing, I try to always have 2 projects going at a time, a contract project and an equity project. Equity project meaning I'm just going to sit and work on this for free in hopes that it makes me some money and I will own it and that will be great. Contract project obviously being, pay me money, I build it for you. So, so really the big equity project right now is actually Hideout. It's the kind of thing where like the more I put into it, the more I get out of it. It's clearly loved by people. I get good feedback from teachers, has a 5-star rating on the App Store, and has for a really long time. It just needs to be a little bit broader. And so yeah, right now I'm just working on that. I applied for, so the government does an interesting thing called the SBIR program. This is the Small Business Innovation Research. And any government agency that makes, or that has a budget of over, I think it's like 100 million or something, is required to spend some small percentage of that on the private sector, basically giving the private sector opportunities to do research on things that are in line with that department's objectives and then to try to commercialize them. So this is SBIR. So I actually just submitted an SBIR grant for Hideout, basically saying, hey, Hideout's awesome, people love it. Give me money and I'll make it even bigger, and that will be super great because then tons of kids will learn how to read. So there are companies out there whose entire revenue model is just get tons of grants. I won't say I am super, like, I don't think I aspire too much to do that, but at the same time, just the process of figuring out, the process of writing the grant helped me understand the priorities of the US Department of Education when it comes to educational technology. And if you're building stuff that's going to be used by teachers, that's a really good thing. So in a way, I kind of did it knowing that that was going to refine the focus of the app a little bit. But as the side benefit, if it gets picked up, then yay, funny. So yeah, Hideout's kind of the main project. I've done a couple other ones that, I don't know, it's weird. Some of the contract work, people can be kind of weird about. Sometimes people really want you to sign NDAs and to just never talk about anything because they're afraid someone will steal their idea, which to me is just laughable, but whatever. But no, I'd say Hideout is kind of the main project other than the contract jobs. So yeah. Part of the reason behind Hideout, I'll just say this as well, is that I've kind of figured out a system for it. I can sit down and build one of those activities in 20 hours. And so it's just the kind of thing that not only kind of needs and deserves to be expanded, but it happens to be not that hard to expand. We've kind of got this process. I call the researcher, we have an initial conversation, I prototype it out using really junky sketches, and then we kind of refine it and then go back and make the good art and sing the good song and, sing the song. And yeah, so we have a good system for it, so it just kind of makes sense to keep going on it. But, beyond that, I've got a Google Doc with about 100 things on it, and maybe once the things I'm done with are all finished, then we move to, item number 99 of that list. Yep. Yeah.
Did you have a clear goal in business school before you found out about you?
No.
Okay, I'm just curious. You had to have had imagination in there somewhere. So your imagination was trying to take you somewhere.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Well, so business school. Business school's interesting. Kelly's big about brand management. A lot of their graduates go to work for, like Kellogg's and General Mills and Nestle, Procter & Gamble, those kind of places. So for the first year, I tried really hard to get that kind of a job, like to get that kind of an internship and to do that. And it just didn't like I would sit down at the interviews it's like we both kind of had the same question of like, what are you doing in here? And like they knew it, and I was like kind of learning it, but they definitely knew it. And so the second year, I just thought, like the stuff I'm learning here is awesome, but I'm gonna construct something out of this that's different than what you normally do. So yeah, it took, it was probably a few months after I graduated that the discussion about learning games really started to kind of take shape. And so until that point, things were a little bit more nebulous. But it's weird though, as it started to take shape, and especially after we started enjoying even just the success of downloads, right? Alphabet Zoo, the financial success of Alphabet Zoo is, in the thousands of dollars, not the tens of thousands of dollars. But just getting a lot of people to download it, we were like, okay, this is kind of cool. And we found ourselves kind of starting to develop these really strong opinions about learning game design. We would download these other apps, and we would hate them because we would start to make these observations about how they were terrible. And so pretty quickly, we kind of zeroed in on it. The whole NBA games thing, I don't know if I'll ever go back to that. It'd be fun to do. I maintain the belief that most of that stuff could be taught using some really interesting games. But there's, I don't know, a lot of stuff to do. Yep. Any other questions? All right.
Well, real quick before we end the
Yeah,
video,
go ahead.
How can people stay in contact with you, check out work that you've done?
Oh, yeah.
What
Yeah,
are some
totally.
ways on social media?
My Twitter handle is there's no place to write it down. That's fine. My Twitter handle is Braid of Steel. My company is Third Rail Games.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. There's a website. There's a Twitter feed. There's nothing useful really on either of those, but they do exist. So yeah, that's where you can find me. I love to help people. Ask me anything. Email me, hit me up. I love to help people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect timing. I just finished my drink.